Commander Kalen stared at the anomalous signal pulsing on the bridge's main display, its archaic signature burning like an ember against the void. He rubbed his sensitive eyes, adapted for the perpetual twilight of Xylo's habitats, and felt the familiar weight of duty settling on his shoulders. Unregistered distress beacon, primitive text signature, originating from the asteroid cluster in Sector 7, reported Navigation Officer Thale, her voice carefully modulated to betray no emotion, as was proper for a Xylo's officer. Preliminary scans indicate. Impossible readings, Commander. Clarify, Kalen ordered, straightening his posture in the command chair of the Deep Space Patrol vessel Vigil. Thale hesitated, an unusual break in protocol. The signal carries markers consistent with pre-sundering human technology. Damaged but operational. A tense silence fell across the bridge. The Kuiper Fringe was notorious for its dangers and mysteries, a perfect breeding ground for the unexpected. But this violated everything the Xylos Concordat had established as historical fact. Regulations are clear, interjected First Officer Rorik, his tall frame casting a shadow across the tactical display. Anomalies of this nature are to be documented and destroyed. Immediately, Kalen nodded mechanically, but something deep within him, something his people would consider a dangerous flaw, held him back from giving the order. Perhaps it was the echoes of his late mentor's whispered questions about their official history, or perhaps simply the fatigue of centuries of rigid adherence to Concordat doctrine. "Prepare a shuttle," Kalen said finally. "I want a closer look." "Commander," Rorik protested, his genetically modified features hardening. "Protocol requires." "I'm well aware of protocol, First Officer," Kalen interrupted, rising from his chair. "But we're also mandated to investigate potential threats thoroughly before neutralization." "That's what we'll do." As Rorik reluctantly complied, Kalen felt a familiar discord. The friction between what the Concordat demanded and the questions that had haunted him since his mentor's suspicious death. This signal represented everything the Xylos feared. A connection to humanity, the self-destructive progenitors who had supposedly torn themselves apart in the cataclysm known as the Sundering, leaving only their modified offspring, like the Xylos, to inherit a fractured solar system. Yet something about this anomaly called to him like a voice from the abyss of time. And Kalen, for all his outward conformity, had never been able to silence the part of him that listened. The shuttle cut through the dangerous debris field surrounding the asteroid cluster, navigating paths that would have been impossible without Xylo's sensory enhancements. Kalen sat rigid in the commander's seat, flanked by Rorik and a security detail. None spoke as the craft's sensors pinpointed the signal's source. "There," announced the pilot, pointing toward a massive asteroid. Embedded in its rocky surface was a small vessel, its design alien and archaic to Xylo's eyes. "Preliminary identification?" Kalen asked, leaning forward. "Consistent with early long-range cryosleep vessels," replied the science officer. "Designation visible on hull. Odyssey. Human construct, predating the Sundering by approximately 17 months, according to our historical records." Rorik's expression darkened. A ghost ship, or worse, a trap. Kalen ignored him, focusing instead on the vessel's condition. "Life support status?" "Failing, but still functional in certain compartments," the science officer reported. "There's..." "Commander, I'm detecting a life sign. Faint but present." The impossible had just become inconceivable. According to every historical document in the Concordat archives, pure strain humans had become extinct during the Sundering, over 4 centuries ago. "Prepare boarding procedures," Kalen ordered, feeling the weight of history pressing upon his decision. "Full containment protocols." The Odyssey's airlock surrendered to Xylo's engineering with reluctant groans. Kalen led the boarding party, their environmental suits unnecessary for Xylo's physiology, but maintained for containment purposes. The ship's interior was a tomb of human ambition, cramped corridors designed for beings who had never known the pressurized depths the Xylos called home, control panels with primitive tactile interfaces rather than neural links. "Life sign is localized to the cryobay," reported the medical officer, consulting her scanner. "One signature, extremely weak. They moved through the vessel with practiced efficiency, past dead systems and the frozen corpses of crew members whose cryopods had failed centuries ago. The air was stale, recycled far beyond its intended capacity. Finally, they reached the cryobay, a chamber of technological sarcophagi, all dark and silent save one. A single pod hummed with the last reserves of the ship's power, its translucent cover revealing a figure within. The medical officer worked quickly, interfacing her equipment with the ancient system. Cryostasis is failing, she reported. The occupant will die if we don't intervene. Kalen stared at the face behind the frosted panel, distinctly human, without the evolved features of Xylo's adaptation. A woman, her features delicate by Xylo's standards, unmarked by the genetic modifications that had allowed his species to thrive in the outer system's harsh environments. Commander, Rorik warned, extracting this specimen violates at least 7 Concordat directives. We don't know what pathogens it might carry, what threats it poses to. Revive her, Kalen ordered, cutting through Rorik's objections. Implement full medical quarantine protocols. The revival process was precarious. Human physiological requirements differed significantly from Xylo's parameters. The medical officer worked diligently, applying centuries-advanced technology to support functions the ancient cryopod could no longer maintain. Finally, color began returning to the woman's pale features, her chest rising and falling with increasingly regular breaths. Her eyes fluttered open, startlingly bright against her skin, lacking the protective membranes of Xylo's eyes. Her gaze darted wildly, fixing on the boarding party with a look of confusion that rapidly transformed into terror. "Where?" she gasped, her voice cracking from centuries of disuse. When she saw the Xylos' faces surrounding her, she screamed, a primal sound that triggered ancient defensive instincts in the boarding party. "Sedate her," Rorik demanded, reaching for his weapon. "No," Kalen countered firmly. "Lower your weapons. All of you." He stepped forward, raising his empty hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "We're not here to harm you," he said, speaking slowly in the archaic human language he'd studied during his historical training. "Your ship was damaged. We found your distress signal." The woman's breathing remained rapid, but her screams subsided. Her eyes, brown, Kalen noted, a color rare among the Xylos, darted between the boarding party members. "What were you?" she whispered. The question struck Kalen like a physical blow. She didn't recognize them as human offshoots, as the descendants of her own kind. The gulf of evolutionary divergence and centuries stood between them like an uncrossable void. "I am Commander Kalen of the Xylos Concordat Vessel Vigil," he replied evenly. "We are." He hesitated, uncertain how to explain 4 centuries of post-human evolution to someone who had slept through it all. "We evolved from humans, adapted to live in the outer system." The woman's expression shifted from terror to disbelief. "How long have I been asleep?" Kalen met her gaze directly. "Approximately 412 years, by your calendar." Her face crumpled as the enormity of this truth crashed upon her. "The others?" "My crew." Kalen's silence was answer enough. Tears formed in her eyes. Another biological function the Xylos had evolutionarily suppressed as inefficient. The sight triggered something uncomfortable in Kalen, a ghostly echo of emotional responses his ancestors had deemed unnecessary. "What's your name?" he asked, attempting to redirect her focus. She swallowed hard, visibly struggling to compose herself. "Alara. Alara Vasic, Senior Xenobiologist, Odyssey Expedition." "Alara," Kalen repeated, the human name feeling strange on his tongue. "We need to transfer you to our vessel for medical attention. Your ship's systems are failing." She hesitated, then nodded weakly. As the medical officer prepared her for transport, Rorik pulled Kalen aside. "This is a catastrophic breach of protocol," the first officer hissed. "She should be placed in stasis and delivered directly to Concordat intelligence. Her existence threatens everything." "She's a survivor, not a specimen," Kalen responded, keeping his voice low but firm. And she might possess knowledge that could fill crucial gaps in our historical understanding. Our historical understanding is complete and sanctified by the Concordat, Rorik insisted. Whatever this, Primitive believes is irrelevant at best, heretical at worst. Kalen stared at his second-in-command, suddenly seeing the rigid indoctrination that shaped him, that shaped all Xylos from inception. Then let intelligence determine that, he said finally. But we will treat her humanely until then. Humanely, Rorik repeated, the word dripping with disdain. A concerning choice of terminology, Commander. As they prepared to transport Alara to the vigil, Kalen caught her watching him with a mixture of fear and calculation. She was disoriented and traumatized, yes, but there was an intelligence behind those eyes that the centuries of sleep hadn't dimmed. She would have questions, and for the first time in his career, Kalen wasn't certain. The Concordat's answers would satisfy either of them. Aboard the vigil, Alara was placed in a secure medical bay, modified to accommodate her human physiological needs. The ship's medical officer, Dr. Neres, approached her examinations with scientific curiosity rather than the revulsion most of the crew displayed. Fascinating, Neres murmured, reviewing Alara's biometric data. Pure baseline human genetic profile. No adaptations for radiation resistance, pressure tolerance, or metabolic efficiency. Alara sat rigidly on the examination table, watching the doctor's every move. I'm gathering that humans like me don't exist anymore, she said cautiously. Neres glanced up, her large eyes blinking behind protective membranes. According to Concordat records, unmodified humans perished during the sundering. Your existence is unprecedented. The sundering, Alara repeated. You've mentioned that before. What exactly was it? Neres hesitated, glancing toward the security camera. Commander Kalen will brief you on historical matters, she said finally. I'm only authorized to address your medical needs. Alara nodded slowly. Let me guess. History is controlled information in your society. Neres' silence was confirmation enough. Later, Kalen entered the medical bay with a carefully neutral expression that belied the turmoil beneath. He dismissed the guards with a gesture, ensuring privacy for their conversation. Dr. Neres reports you're in remarkable condition. Considering the circumstances, he began, taking a seat across from Alara. Physically, perhaps, Alara replied, studying him with those disconcertingly direct human eyes. Mentally, I'm trying to process the fact that I've lost everyone and everything I've ever known. Kalen nodded, uncertain how to respond to such raw emotion. Xylo's social conditioning discouraged emotional displays as inefficient and destabilizing. I understand this must be difficult, he said finally, the words feeling inadequate. Do you? Alara challenged. Your people look at me like I'm a historical artifact or a dangerous pathogen. No one will tell me what happened to Earth, to humanity. This sundering you all reference with such dread. What was it? Kalen hesitated, weighing his words carefully. The sundering was the culmination of human self-destructive tendencies, he recited, the official Concordat explanation feeling hollow even as he spoke it. A combination of environmental collapse, resource wars, and technological hubris that rendered Earth uninhabitable and fractured humanity into competing, evolved offshoots. The Xylos were among those who fled to the outer system, adapting to survive in its harsh conditions. That's your history? Alara asked, her voice quiet but intense. That humanity destroyed itself. It's established fact, Kalen replied, though he couldn't meet her gaze as he said it. Convenient fact for a society that seems built on control and isolation, she observed. Before the Odyssey launched, Earth was certainly in crisis. Climate destabilization, resource depletion, social unrest. But there were also unprecedented cooperation efforts, technological breakthroughs, restoration projects. Our mission wasn't escape from inevitable doom. It was insurance, exploration, humanity hedging its bets. Her words resonated uncomfortably with the doubts his mentor had seeded years ago. Kalen leaned forward. What exactly was your mission, Alara? We were headed for the Proxima Centauri system, she explained. A long-term colonization and research expedition. 1,000 colonists in cryostasis, terraforming equipment, genetic repositories of Earth species. We were supposed to establish a self-sustaining human foothold while maintaining communication with Earth. What went wrong? I don't know exactly, she admitted. I was revived automatically when my cryopod began failing. The ship's systems were already critically damaged. Navigation logs indicate some kind of propulsion malfunction that sent us off course and eventually back into the solar system. The others? Her voice cracked slightly. Their pods failed completely while I was in partial stasis. Kalen processed this information, tried to reconcile it with Concordat historical accounts. Were there other missions like yours? Dozens, Alara confirmed. To different star systems with various objectives. The Odyssey was just one branch of the Diaspora Initiative. This contradicted the Concordat's positioning of the Xylos as the only significant survivors of human decline. If other missions had succeeded, Commander, she said suddenly, breaking into his thoughts, I have data archives from Earth. They're in my personal effects from the Odyssey, historical records, scientific databases, cultural repositories. They might help fill in what happened after we left. Kalen stiffened. Unsanctioned historical data was among the most restricted materials in Concordat society. Merely possessing such archives was punishable by reconditioning. But the possibility of unfiltered information from before the Sundering, information that might confirm or refute his mentor's suspicions. I'll have your personal effects transferred here, he decided, knowing he was crossing a line from which there would be no return. But access to them will be restricted to you and me for now. Alara studied him, her expression softening slightly. You're taking an enormous risk, aren't you? For someone who's essentially a living fossil. Perhaps, Kalen acknowledged, but some questions deserve answers, regardless of risk. As he left the medical bay, Kalen was acutely aware of Rorik watching from the corridor, his disapproval radiating like a physical force. The first officer's loyalty to Concordat doctrine was absolute, and Kalen had just taken the first step toward what that doctrine would undoubtedly classify as treason. Over the following days, Kalen found himself increasingly drawn to the medical bay and Alara's company, while most of the crew maintained their distance, viewing her as either a scientific curiosity or a dangerous anomaly. Kalen discovered in her a perspective untainted by centuries of Concordat indoctrination. They began examining her personal data archives, which had survived in remarkably good condition within a quantum storage device. Much of the data was corrupted or encrypted in formats the Vigil systems struggled to interpret, but fragments revealed an Earth different from the doomed planet of Concordat histories. A complex world of contradictions, simultaneously facing catastrophic challenges and achieving remarkable innovations. These climate intervention protocols, Kalen noted during one session, studying atmospheric engineering plans that predated the Sundering, they're more advanced than what the historical record suggested was possible at that time. We were desperate, but not defeated, Alara replied, scrolling through the fragmented data. The megastorms were devastating coastal regions, but the atmospheric carbon capture networks were finally showing measurable results. The Concordat teaches that human environmental engineering was primitive and ultimately counterproductive, Kalen said, frowning. That each attempted solution created cascading new problems. Some did, Alara acknowledged. But we were learning, adapting. It wasn't hopeless. She paused, studying his expression. Your Concordat seems to have constructed a very specific narrative about humanity's failures. Kalen couldn't disagree. Each recovered fragment from Alara's archives contradicted some aspect of official Xylos history. The discrepancies were too numerous to be coincidental, suggesting deliberate historical revisionism on a massive scale. Why would your leaders do this? Alara asked quietly. Why erase the complexity, focus only on the failures? Control, Kalen answered, the realization crystallizing as he spoke. The Concordat's foundational principle is that isolation and rigid social regulation are necessary for survival. The early Xylos leadership established that doctrine by positioning themselves as the rational survivors of human irrationality and chaos. He looked up at her. If human society wasn't entirely self-destructive, if there were viable alternatives to the Concordat's approach, their authority would be questioned. Their conversation was interrupted by a priority alert on Kalen's communicator. "Commander to the bridge," immediately came the clipped voice of the communications officer. Kalen rose. "Continue without me. I'll return when I can." On the bridge, tension hung in the air like a physical presence. Rorik stood by the communication station, his posture rigid with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Commander," he announced formally, "we have received direct orders from Concordat Command. They've dispatched an intelligence vessel to rendezvous with us in 16 hours. We are instructed to prepare the human specimen for immediate transfer and to compile all data regarding her discovery." Kalen maintained his composure with effort. "The human has a name, First Officer, and she's under my protection as a survivor recovered by this vessel." "Your protection is now superseded," Rorik replied coldly. "Intelligence has classified this matter as a priority alpha security concern. They specifically instruct that the human is to be sedated for transfer." The implications were clear. Once in intelligence custody, Ilera would disappear into the secretive apparatus of the Concordat. She would be studied, interrogated, and ultimately disposed of when she no longer provided useful information. Meanwhile, any historical revelations would be suppressed, manipulated to reinforce official narratives. "Acknowledged," Kalen said finally. "I'll inform a medical bay to prepare appropriate sedation protocols." "When is the estimated rendezvous?" 0600 hours tomorrow," Rorik replied, clearly relieved by Kalen's apparent compliance. "Coordinates are being transmitted to navigation now." Kalen nodded and left the bridge, his mind racing. He had 16 hours to decide between everything he had ever known, his career, his identity, his place within Xylo society, and the truth that Ilera represented. A truth that his mentor had died trying to uncover. The choice, he realized, had already been made the moment he decided to investigate that impossible signal. In the privacy of his quarters, Kalen accessed the encoded files his mentor had entrusted to him before her mysterious death, files he had never dared to open until now. They contained fragmented research, suppressed historical documents, and a star chart marking a location deep in the Kuiper Fringe. Ethelberg, a rumored haven for Xylo's dissidents and others who rejected Concordat authority. Kalen's path was clear, though where it led remained shrouded in uncertainty. He began making preparations, careful to avoid detection by the ship's monitoring systems. When he returned to the medical bay, Ilera immediately sensed his changed demeanor. "What's happened?" she asked, setting aside the data tablet. "Concordat intelligence has taken an interest in you," Kalen informed her, keeping his voice low. "They're sending a vessel to collect you." Fear flashed across her face. "What does that mean for me?" "Nothing good," he admitted. "They'll extract whatever information they can, then ensure you can never contradict their historical narrative." Ilera paled. "You're going to hand me over to them?" "No," Kalen replied, the word marking his final break with everything he had been taught to uphold. "We're leaving, both of us. I have allies on this ship who question Concordat doctrine. Together, we can reach people who might help us reveal the truth." "Why would you risk everything for me, for historical truth?" Ilera asked, searching his face. "Because living with comfortable lies has become more painful than facing uncomfortable truths," Kalen answered simply. "My mentor died pursuing these questions. I won't let her sacrifice, or yours, be meaningless." Their plan took shape quickly. Dr. Neres agreed to help, having harbored her own doubts about Concordat medical ethics. The ship's systems specialist, Torik, was persuaded by the technological marvels in Ilera's archives that contradicted Concordat limitations on innovation. With their assistance, Kalen arranged for a controlled systems failure that would create the opportunity they needed. At 0200 hours, 4 hours before the scheduled rendezvous, emergency alarms blared throughout the vigil. Primary systems went offline, Emergency protocols activated, and in the confusion, Kalen and his co-conspirators made their move. Rorik realized the deception too late, finding himself locked in the command deck with loyal crew members as Kalen's group secured shuttle. By the time they restored communications, the shuttle was accelerating away from the Vigil, its signature masked by a sensor-jamming device of pre-sundering design, another impossible technology from Alera's archives. "They'll pursue us," Torik warned as he piloted the shuttle deeper into the fringe. "And the intelligence vessel will join the hunt when it arrives." "We have advantages," Kalen responded, studying navigation charts. "Knowledge of the fringe that intelligence operatives lack, and technology they don't know exists." Beside him, Alera worked with Dr. Neres to interface her data archives with the shuttle systems. "If we can fully decrypt these navigation supplements," she explained, "we'll have mapping data for regions that might have been forgotten or deliberately omitted from your charts." As predicted, the Vigil launched pursuit vessels within the hour. The chase through the Kuiper Fringe became a deadly game of hide-and-seek among asteroid fields, cometary debris, and radiation zones. Several times, capture seemed imminent, only for Alera to identify an escape route using her archival knowledge of early solar system exploration. During a momentary respite, hidden within the magnetic shadow of a dwarf planet, Kalen found Alera staring at the unfamiliar stars visible through the shuttle's viewport. "For centuries," she murmured, "everyone I knew, everything I worked for gone. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still in cryosleep, dreaming this impossible future." "For what it's worth," Kalen replied, "you've given purpose to those of us who questioned but never had the courage to act. Your existence proves the Concordat built its authority on lies." She turned to him, studying his alien features with newfound familiarity. "We're both relics, in a way. You of a society built on fabricated history, me of a history that's been erased. Perhaps together we can restore some balance between those extremes," he suggested. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Torik's urgent call. "Commander, intelligence vessel detected on long-range sensors. Its capabilities exceed the Vigil's significantly." "How long until intercept?" Kalen demanded, returning to the command area. 3 hours at current trajectories," Torik reported grimly. "Their sensors will detect us the moment we leave this magnetic shadow." Alera joined them, her expression determined. "I might have a solution." She activated a holographic display from her data archive. These were classified propulsion experiments from just before the Odyssey launched, a method of creating temporary gravitational distortions that could mask a vessel's signature while enhancing its speed. Torik studied the specifications with widening eyes. This technology was deliberately suppressed in our historical records, he realized. It contradicts Concordat teachings about human technological limitations. "Can you implement it?" Kalen asked. "With modifications to our drive systems, yes," Torik confirmed. "But it's risky, untested with our technology." "No riskier than capture by intelligence," Kalen decided. "Make it happen." 2 hours later, their modified shuttle emerged from the magnetic shadow, immediately triggering pursuit alerts from the intelligence vessel. But as Torik activated the hybrid propulsion system, reality seemed to bend around them, a controlled gravitational anomaly that both accelerated their craft and diffused their sensor signature into background radiation. The intelligence vessel's communications, intercepted by their systems, revealed confusion and frustration as their target seemingly vanished despite being in visual range moments before. The technology that the Concordat had declared impossible had proven their salvation. With their pursuers temporarily confounded, they set course for the coordinates from Kalen's mentor's files. Ethelberg, the hidden outpost of those who remembered what the Concordat wanted forgotten. Ethelberg revealed itself gradually. What appeared to be a small, unremarkable wandering moon slowly resolving into an artificial construct of remarkable sophistication as they approached, its surface pitted and scarred to mimic natural formation. "Incredible," breathed Dr. Neres as the structure's true nature became apparent. How could something of this scale remain hidden from Concordat surveillance? The same way the truth about human history remained hidden, Kalin replied, by ensuring those who discovered it either joined the conspiracy of silence or disappeared. Their approach triggered automated defense systems, ancient but deadly effective. Communication attempts were met with suspicious silence until Alara suggested transmitting a specific sequence from her archives, the rhythmic mathematical pattern used by early human deep space missions as a universal greeting. The response was immediate, a transmission in an archaic human language that Alara alone understood. After a brief exchange, a concealed docking bay opened in what had appeared to be a crater. "They're cautious but willing to meet," she translated. "They want to know how we found them and why we've come." The truth, Kalin decided. Nothing less will suffice now. The interior of Ethelberg defied all Concordat descriptions of pre-sundering human capabilities. A self-sustaining ecosystem thrived within the artificial moon, supporting a diverse population of modified humans. Not just Xylos, but other evolutionary branches that Concordat history claimed had perished centuries ago. They were met by a delegation led by an elderly Xylos whose features bore the marks of extreme age, something rarely seen in Concordat society, where utility determined lifespan. "I am historian Saren," the elder introduced herself, studying them with keen interest. "The first authentic Concordat officer to find us in 70 years, and the first unmodified human I've ever encountered." "Fascinating company you keep, Commander Kalin." "You know me?" Kalin asked, surprised. "I know of you," Saren corrected. "Your mentor Viridian was my student many years ago, before she chose to work within the system rather than outside it. Her occasional messages kept us informed of potential allies, and her encryption key is embedded in your navigation data." The revelation that his mentor had maintained contact with this forbidden enclave explained much about her dangerous questions and ultimate fate. "Viridian was murdered for seeking the truth," Kalin said quietly. "I'm here to complete what she started." "And what truth would that be?" Saren challenged. "The authentic history of the Sundering," Kalin replied. "The reality behind the Concordats' founding myths." Saren's expression softened. "Then you've come to the right place. But be warned, truth is rarely as comfortable as the lies we're taught to embrace." Over the following days, Alara's archives were integrated with Ethelberg's historical repositories, the most complete record of human history outside Concordat control. With the combined knowledge and Ethelberg's advanced decryption capabilities, the full picture began to emerge. The Sundering, they discovered, was not a single apocalyptic event, but a protracted period of environmental, social, and political collapse. As Earth's habitability declined, various human groups had pursued different evolutionary paths through genetic engineering, some adapting to remain on Earth despite its changing conditions, others modifying themselves for life in space, on Mars, or in the outer system. The early Xylos were indeed among these groups, but not the sole survivors as Concordat history claimed. Their founders had been extreme isolationists who believed human nature itself was fundamentally flawed and required correction through genetic and social engineering. They had established their colonies in the outer system not merely to survive, but to implement their vision of a purified humanity. When other human offshoots attempted to maintain contact and cooperation, the Proto-Concordat leadership deliberately severed these connections, eventually rewriting history to position themselves as the sole rational survivors of human self-destruction. The most disturbing revelation came in records of the early Concordats' systematic elimination of competing narratives, including the destruction of other human settlements in the outer system and the suppression of evidence that Earth, while severely damaged, had not been rendered completely uninhabitable as claimed. They built their entire society on a foundation of deliberate historical distortion. Kalin realized the weight of this truth almost crushing. Generations of Xylos raised to believe humanity destroyed itself, when in reality, the Concordats' founders chose isolation and then justified it by fabricating extinction. Control through historical narrative is the most effective form of power, Saren observed. If you control what people believe about the past, You control how they interpret the present and what futures they can imagine. Alara, who had been studying the combined archives with singular focus, looked up with glistening eyes. Earth survived, damaged, transformed, but not destroyed. And there were other missions like mine. Some succeeded in reaching their destinations. Humanity diversified rather than died. Dr. Neri summarized, her scientific mind grappling with implications that contradicted her entire education. We're not the sole inheritors of human legacy, but one branch among many. The revelation sparked something rarely seen in Xylo society: open emotional expression. Torek wept silently, mourning the connections denied to generations of his people. Neres paced in agitation, her scientific worldview simultaneously validated and shattered by evidence of suppressed knowledge. For Kalen, the truth brought both vindication and vertigo. The certainty that his mentor's suspicions had been justified, coupled with the disorienting collapse of foundational beliefs upon which he had built his identity. Alara alone seemed to find a measure of peace in these discoveries. My people weren't perfect, she said quietly. We made catastrophic mistakes, pushed Earth to its limits. But we weren't the monsters of your histories either. We fought to survive, to adapt, to preserve what we could of our world and our humanity. Their period of reflection was cut short by urgent alerts from Ethelberg's perimeter sensors. Concordat vessels had entered the region, their search pattern suggesting they had narrowed their focus to this sector. They'll find us eventually, Saren warned. Intelligence has resources we can't match indefinitely. Then we don't hide, Kalen decided. We challenge the narrative directly. With Alara's testimony and the combined archives as evidence, we can force the Concordat to confront its foundational lies. You're proposing open resistance against the most powerful institution in the outer system, Torek said, his tone mixing fear and admiration. Not alone, Kalen replied. Ethelberg isn't the only community of dissidents and truth-seekers. Is it, historian Saren? The elder smiled, revealing a strategic mind behind her scholarly demeanor. Indeed not. We maintain discrete connections with similar enclaves throughout the system, including some within Concordat territories. People who preserve alternative histories, technological knowledge deemed impossible by official doctrine, even genetic diversity the Concordat considers obsolete. A network of truth, Alara murmured, preserving what the Concordat tried to erase. Exactly, Saren confirmed. Separately, we're vulnerable. United, with concrete evidence that contradicts official history. She left the implication hanging. We could force a reckoning, Kalen completed the thought. Not through violence, but through truth, the one thing the Concordat fears more than any external threat. The plan took shape rapidly. They would use Ethelberg's communication network to disseminate key historical revelations throughout Concordat territories, bypassing official channels using technologies the Concordat believed impossible. Alara would record her testimony along with documentation from her archives, creating an undeniable connection to humanity's actual past. Meanwhile, Kalen and those Xylos who had joined their cause would publicly challenge Concordat historical doctrine, forcing authorities to either acknowledge the deception or visibly suppress the truth, either outcome weakening the foundation of absolute authority upon which the regime rested. This won't be resolved quickly or cleanly, Saren cautioned. You're initiating a struggle that may span generations. Every meaningful change does, Kalen replied. But we have something the Concordat lacks. What's that? Asked Torek. A historical truth worth fighting for, Kalen answered, and a future built on honesty rather than convenient lies. As they finalized preparations, Kalen found Alara in Ethelberg's observation dome, gazing at the distant pinpoint of light that was Earth, so diminished from this distance, yet still present despite centuries of Concordat insistence on its uninhabitability. Strange to think that's home, she said without turning, aware of his presence through some subtle human sense. Or was home, a place I'll never see again, changed beyond recognition, even if I could return. Kalen joined her at the viewport, standing close enough that their reflections overlapped in the transparent material. I've never thought of any place as home, he admitted. The Concordat discourages attachment to location, efficiency through mobility. Another method of control, Ilera observed. People who belong nowhere question nothing. Yet here I am, questioning everything, Kalen said with a wry smile that felt unfamiliar on his face, an expression rarely used in Xylo's society. Ilera turned to face him, studying the features so alien yet increasingly familiar to her. Why did you save me, Kalen? Not just initially, but later, risking everything to prevent intelligence from taking me. You couldn't have known what we'd discover. Kalen considered the question carefully. My mentor once told me that truth has a resonance that falsehood lacks. When I found you, a living contradiction to everything I've been taught, I felt that resonance. Everything else followed from that moment. That's quite poetic for someone from a society that suppresses emotional expression, she noted with gentle humor. Perhaps humans aren't the only ones who can evolve, he replied. Their moment of connection was interrupted by Saren's arrival. The elderly historian moved with surprising grace despite her years, her expression grave but determined. It's time, she announced. Concordat vessels have established a search perimeter. If we're going to implement our plan, it must be now. Kalen nodded, immediately shifting to the focused commander he had been trained to be. Status of the transmission preparations? Ready, Saren confirmed. Torek has integrated Ilera's archive encryption with our distributed network. When activated, it will bypass standard Concordat filters. The three made their way to Ethelberg's communications center, where Dr. Neres and Torek were making final adjustments to an array of equipment that merged ancient human technology with evolved Xylo's innovations, a physical embodiment of the historical continuity the Concordat had tried to sever. We've loaded the core historical documents, Torek reported, including Ilera's testimony and supporting evidence. The distribution pattern is designed to reach maximum population centers simultaneously, making comprehensive suppression impossible. How will the Concordat respond? Ilera asked, her voice steady despite the enormity of what they were attempting. Initially with denial and attempts to discredit, Saren predicted. Then when that fails with force against visible targets like Ethelberg. We've accounted for that, Kalen assured her. Contingency evacuation protocols are already underway. Essential personnel and archives are being transferred to secondary locations throughout the system. Ilera nodded, then hesitated. Before we do this, I want you all to understand what you're risking. I've already lost my world. You're about to challenge the foundations of yours. A world built on lies deserves to be challenged, Dr. Neres said firmly, surprising them with her vehemence. As a medical practitioner, I've seen the damage Concordat dogma inflicts, genetic potential suppressed, emotional health sacrificed for conformity, innovation stifled by historical falsehoods. Truth is the only treatment for such systemic disease. Torek nodded agreement. The Concordat didn't just lie about human history, constrained what we could become by limiting what we believe we were. That ends today. Kalen looked at his improbable allies, the elderly dissident historian, the idealistic doctor, the innovative technician, and most remarkably, the human woman who had slept through centuries only to awaken and challenge everything that had developed in her absence. Initiate transmission, he ordered. Torek activated the system. Throughout Concordat territories, from the structured habitats of the asteroid belt to the regulated environments of the Jovian and Saturnian moons, from research outposts on Uranus to administrative centers on Neptune's Triton, communication systems suddenly carried unauthorized content. Ilera's face appeared on screens large and small, her humanity unmistakable despite centuries of Concordat conditioning to see such features as primitive or mythological. My name is Ilera Vasic, her recorded message began. I am a human being from Earth, preserved in cryosleep for over 400 years. What I'm about to share contradicts everything the Xylos Concordat has taught you about your history, your origins, and your relationship to humanity. The transmission continued, methodically presenting evidence from combined archives. Earth records, Odyssey logs, suppressed Concordat documents, archaeological findings preserved by dissidents like Saren. The carefully constructed narrative of human self-destruction crumbled under the weight of actual historical evidence. Reaction was immediate and chaotic. In Ethelberg's communication center, monitoring systems displayed a surge of unofficial transmissions throughout Concordat territories as citizens shared, discussed, and debated the revelations. Official channels initially went silent, then began broadcasting denunciations of the manufactured propaganda and technological deception. "They're scrambling," Torek observed with grim satisfaction. "Intelligence doesn't have a prepared response for this scale of information breach." Phase 2, Kalen directed, and Torek activated a secondary protocol that connected Concordat citizens directly with evidence repositories hidden throughout the system, ensuring that even if official suppression succeeded, the truth would remain accessible to those who sought it. Their victory was short-lived. Alarms blared throughout Ethelberg as sensors detected Concordat vessels breaking from search patterns into direct attack formations. Military response authorized more quickly than anticipated, Kalen noted grimly. Evacuation status? Primary archives and essential personnel secure, Saren reported. Secondary evacuations at 60% completion. "We need to buy them time," Kalen decided. "Torek, are the gravitational distortion systems operational on our shuttle?" The technician nodded. "Modified and enhanced based on Alera's archives. Then we create a diversion," Kalen explained. "Draw their attention away from Ethelberg long enough for the remaining evacuations to complete." "That's suicide," Dr. Neres protested. "Intelligence vessels are equipped with weapons specifically designed to prevent escape." "Not suicide," Kalen corrected. "A calculated risk. Their weapons are designed to counter known technologies, not the impossible capabilities from Alera's archives." Alera stepped forward. "I'm coming with you." "That's not necessary," Kalen objected. "You're too valuable to risk. The only living connection to humanity's actual past." "Exactly why I need to go," she insisted. "If I'm captured, I become a tool for Concordat propaganda. If I remain here, I'm a target for their attack. The logical placement for the most valuable evidence is with the most maneuverable vessel." Kalen recognized the strategic wisdom in her argument, though something beyond logic made him reluctant to place her in danger. This, too, was an unfamiliar sensation. The Xylo's emphasis on rational calculation had never prepared him for the emotional complexity of genuine connection. "Very well," he conceded. "Torek, prepare the shuttle. Dr. Neres, you'll remain with historian Saren to coordinate the remaining evacuations." Minutes later, their shuttle launched from Ethelberg's concealed bay, immediately triggering pursuit alerts from the approaching Concordat vessels. As planned, they accelerated directly toward the largest concentration of attackers, appearing to attempt a desperate breakthrough. "Weapons locks detected," Torek reported tensely. "Multiple targeting systems active." "Maintain course until my mark," Kalen instructed, watching the tactical display with focused intensity. The Concordat vessels were converging, concentrating their firepower on the anticipated flight path. "Now," he ordered when the geometry was perfect. Torek activated the hybrid propulsion system. Reality distorted around them as gravitational anomalies bent both space and sensor readings. To the Concordat vessels, their shuttle seemed to fragment into multiple ghost images, each following a different trajectory. Confusion spread through the attack formation as targeting systems failed to distinguish the actual vessel from its phantoms. "Brilliant," Alera breathed, watching the tactical display. "They're firing on shadows." Using the distraction, they slipped between Concordat vessels, their actual position masked by the gravitational distortions. By the time intelligence commanders realized the deception, their shuttle was accelerating beyond effective weapons range, while Ethelberg completed its evacuations unhindered. "Pursuit vessels launching," Torek warned. "Faster and better armed than the main force." As expected, Kalen acknowledged calmly. "Set course for coordinates Alpha 7, the Jupiter trailing cloud. We'll use the Trojan asteroids for cover." Their flight became a nerve-wracking test of innovation against overwhelming force. The shuttle darted through regions of space the Concordat considered impassable, using gravitational techniques from Alera's archives to achieve velocities that official Xylos science deemed impossible. Each maneuver bought time for the information they had released to spread throughout the system, taking root in minds long kept ignorant of their true history. During a brief respite, hidden in the electromagnetic shadow of a massive Trojan asteroid, Alera examined the tactical display with growing concern. "They're not giving up," she observed. "This isn't just about capturing us anymore. It's about eliminating the threat we represent to their entire power structure." "The Concordat was founded on controlled history," Kalen replied. "We've demonstrated that their control was always an illusion. There's nothing more dangerous to authoritarian systems than proof of their fundamental illegitimacy." "So what's our endgame?" she asked. "We can't run forever." "We don't need to," Kalen explained. "Only long enough for the secondary network to fully establish. Once enough Concordat citizens have accessed the archives, suppression becomes impossible. Ideas, once released, can't be recaptured." Torek interrupted their conversation with a warning. "Multiple vessels converging on our position. They've adapted their sensors to detect our gravitational distortion signature." Kalen studied the tactical display grimly. "They're learning faster than anticipated. We need to change approaches." "I may have a solution," Alera suggested. "The Odyssey's archives contain research on cosmic string theory applications, specifically methods of creating localizable spacetime folds." Torek looked skeptical. "That's theoretical physics, not practical technology." "Not for pre-sundering Earth," Alera countered. "The theory was tested successfully just before we launched. The Concordat suppressed this knowledge because it contradicted their narrative of human technological limitations. Under her guidance, they modified their systems once again, implementing principles that Concordat science had dismissed as impossible for centuries. As pursuit vessels closed in, their shuttle created a temporary space-time anomaly, not merely bending sensor readings, but briefly folding space itself to transition instantly from one location to another. The maneuver succeeded, but at a cost. Critical systems failed under the strain, leaving them drifting near the orbit of Saturn, their engines disabled and life support compromised. "Damage assessment," Kalen demanded. "Propulsion offline. Communications limited to short range. Environmental systems at 40% and declining," Torek reported grimly. "We've escaped immediate capture, but we're essentially dead in space. Can we repair enough to reach a sanctuary location?" Alera asked. Torek shook his head. "Not with our available resources." An uncomfortable silence fell as they confronted their situation. They had succeeded in their primary mission. The truth about human history and Concordat deception was now spreading throughout the system, beyond any possibility of complete suppression. But their personal survival seemed increasingly unlikely. "There's another option," Kalen said finally. "A variant of the same space-time technology that brought us here." "You're thinking of the theoretical emergency application," Alera realized, studying his expression. "A one-way transition requiring all remaining power." Kalen nodded. "If we channel everything, including life support reserves, we could create one final fold. Not to a different location in space, but to a temporal variance." "You're proposing to take us out of sync with normal space-time," Torek translated, his eyes widening. "A suspended state until rescue becomes possible." "It's untested technology," Kalen acknowledged. "Based on theories the Concordat deemed impossible. The risks are substantial, as opposed to the certainty of capture or death." Alera asked with grim humor. "I've already slept through. For centuries, Commander. What's a little more temporal displacement between friends?" Their decision was made more urgent by long-range sensors detecting Concordat vessels adjusting their search patterns toward their quadrant. Working feverishly, they reconfigured their failing systems according to the theoretical framework from Alera's archives. "Power reserves redirected," Torek reported. environmental systems shutting down to provide necessary energy. We'll have approximately 3 minutes of breathable atmosphere after activation, sufficient for the transition to complete if the theory is correct, Kalen noted. Insufficient for survival if it fails. Alara moved to stand beside him at the control interface. Either way, we've accomplished what matters. The truth is free now, spreading through the system, challenging centuries of deception. Truth has a resonance that falsehood lacks. Kalen quoted his earlier words, finding unexpected comfort in them as they faced this final gamble. Concordat vessels detected on long-range sensors, Torek warned. 15 minutes to intercept at current velocities. Initiate the sequence, Kalen ordered. The shuttle's remaining power surged into the modified systems. Around them, reality seemed to blur and stretch as theoretical physics became practical application. The pursuing Concordat vessels would find only an empty, powerless shuttle, its occupants displaced from normal space-time, existing in a suspended state between moments, awaiting a future where rescue might be possible. As the transition process reached its critical phase, Alara's hand found Kalen's. Human and evolved Xylos, separated by centuries of history, yet united by a shared commitment to truth. They had challenged the foundations of a society built on historical deception. Whatever came next, whether rescue by allies who embraced that truth or eternal suspension in their temporal bubble, they had forever changed the course of human and post-human development. The universe around them faded into a luminous haze as the space-time fold completed. Their last sensation was not fear, but a profound sense of possibility. That somewhere, someone, the artificial divisions created by the Concordat would dissolve, and the diverse branches of humanity would recognize their common roots once more. In the silent vessel they left behind, a single data core remained active, broadcasting a simple message on frequencies the Concordat had long since abandoned as obsolete. We were never extinct, only forgotten. Remember,